Yvonne had just celebrated her 68th birthday when she noticed something unsettling. One quiet morning, as she rose from her favorite armchair, a sharp ache shot through her knees, forcing her to grip the table for balance. It wasn't the kind of pain that made you cry out, but the kind that lingered, whispering that something deep inside her body was changing. She brushed it off at first, telling herself it was just part of getting older. But over the next few weeks, simple movements, reaching for a cup from the top shelf, climbing a few stairs, even bending to tie her shoes, became small battles she hadn't faced before. Her daughter, Anna, watched with worry. One evening after dinner, Anna gently said, "Mom, you don't move like you used to. Are you sure everything is okay?" Yvonne wanted to laugh it away, but in her heart, she knew something wasn't right. At her next checkup, the doctor explained what she had feared. Her muscles had weakened, and her bones were losing strength faster than she realized. He told her it was common after 60, but if left unchecked, it could lead to more falls, fractures, and a loss of independence. For Yvonne, the word independence struck like a bell. She had spent her whole life taking care of her family, and the thought of one day needing help just to walk across the room felt unbearable. That night, Yvonne sat quietly by the window, listening to the ticking of the clock. She remembered how she used to dance with her husband, Robert, in their younger days. She thought of the long walks she loved, the evenings tending to her little garden, the joy of lifting her grandchild into her arms. The fear of losing those simple moments weighed heavier than the pain in her joints. She whispered to herself, "I'm not ready to give this up." It was in that moment she decided something had to change. What surprised her most was that the answer didn't come in the form of expensive pills or complicated therapies. Instead, it arrived in the most ordinary way, through food she had seen 100 times but never truly noticed. Seeds and nuts, tiny things she had always thought of as garnish or snacks, suddenly became her quiet allies. Her doctor explained how just a spoonful of these foods, added daily, could bring back strength, reduce pain, and protect the very bones and muscles she feared losing. At first, it sounded too simple. How could something so small hold so much power? But Yvonne was willing to try. She started slowly, sprinkling a handful of seeds into her morning oatmeal, stirring them into warm soups, or blending them into a smooth drink before bed. Within weeks, she noticed the changes. Her legs felt lighter, the cramps in her calves eased, and mornings no longer began with the same stiffness. More than the physical strength, what returned was her confidence. She no longer feared losing her independence. Instead, she felt as though her body was quietly thanking her for every spoonful, every small choice made with care. This journey is not just Yvonne's, it's one shared by countless men and women who wake up one day and realize their bodies need a different kind of support after 60. In the next moments, we will walk with her through the very foods that gave her back her freedom, tiny seeds that carry the weight of strength, balance, and resilience. And as you listen, you may discover that the same handful of seeds could become the turning point in your own story too. The weeks after Yvonne's doctor's visit were filled with quiet reflection. She moved through her home with a new awareness, noticing how often her hand reached out for support. Each time she gripped the banister a little tighter or leaned on the edge of the counter, a pang of frustration stirred inside her. She wasn't the woman who needed help with simple things. She had always been strong, someone her children and grandchildren leaned on. But now, she felt her strength slipping, and the more she tried to ignore it, the heavier the weight became in her heart. One evening, her grandson ran toward her with open arms, laughing and begging to be picked up. Yvonne bent down instinctively, but a sharp cramp shot through her calf, forcing her to stop. She smiled at him, hiding the grimace, but inside she felt broken. Later that night, she admitted to her daughter, "I never thought something as simple as lifting him would feel impossible. It scares me, Anna." Her daughter held her hand and said softly, "Mom, it doesn't have to stay this way. You still have choices." Those words stayed with Yvonne long after the conversation ended. The very next morning, she began looking at her meals differently. She had always enjoyed bread, rice, and the occasional sweet treat, but she had never thought much about what she was missing. Her doctor had mentioned magnesium and calcium and how vital they were for strong bones and steady muscles. Curious, she went to the small local market. For the first time, she paid attention to the shelves filled with jars of seeds, pumpkin, chia, flax. Tiny, unassuming, yet suddenly holding a new kind of promise. She bought a small bag of pumpkin seeds, wondering if such a simple change could truly matter. That night, she sprinkled a spoonful of pumpkin seeds into her vegetable soup. At first, it felt almost laughable, as if she were expecting magic from something so ordinary. But she remembered her doctor's words. It's not about doing everything at once, Yvonne. It's about doing one thing consistently. So she took it as a quiet promise to herself. A spoonful today, another tomorrow, no pressure, just a beginning. Over the next several days, Yvonne noticed subtle shifts. The painful nighttime cramps that once startled her awake came less frequently. Her mornings felt a little lighter, as if her legs carried her more willingly. It wasn't dramatic, but it was enough to spark hope. One morning, while sipping her tea, she realized she hadn't gripped the edge of the table to rise from her chair. She stood, almost without thinking, and felt a small surge of pride. As she shared this with Anna, her daughter smiled with relief. "See, Mom? Your body's responding. It's like it was waiting for you to give it what it needed." That sentence struck Yvonne deeply. For so long, she had believed aging meant only loss, losing strength, losing energy, losing freedom. But now, a new thought crept in. Maybe aging could also mean gaining wisdom, gaining the ability to care for herself in a different way, gaining a softer kind of strength. Her family began noticing too. Her grandson tugged her hand, asking for a walk in the park, and this time she didn't hesitate. They walked slowly, but she felt steady. She breathed deeply, the crisp air filling her lungs, and realized she had stopped thinking about what might go wrong. For the first time in months, she simply enjoyed the moment. The seeds in her soup hadn't just nourished her body, they had planted a seed of confidence in her heart. And so Yvonne's journey began not with a dramatic change, but with one small spoonful of pumpkin seeds, a symbol of possibility. She didn't know yet how far it would carry her, but she understood one thing. Her story wasn't about giving up independence. It was about reclaiming it, one simple choice at a time. In the weeks that followed, Yvonne found herself paying closer attention to the quiet signals her body sent her. She noticed how certain mornings felt easier, how her legs didn't ache quite as much when she moved about the kitchen. It wasn't that she had suddenly become stronger overnight, but something was changing, something subtle but undeniable. Each spoonful of seeds she added to her meals began to feel less like an experiment and more like a ritual, a promise she made to herself with every bite. One evening, while preparing dinner, Anna watched her mother with a curious smile. Yvonne was toasting a few pumpkin seeds in a pan, humming softly to herself as the nutty aroma filled the room. "You seem lighter these days, Mom," Anna said, leaning against the counter. Yvonne paused for a moment, spoon in hand, and let the words sink in. Lighter. That was exactly how she felt, not only in her body but in her spirit. She turned to Anna and replied, "I think I've stopped fighting with myself. For so long, I thought this pain was something I just had to accept. Now I see I still have a say in how my body feels." Her doctor's words replayed in her mind. Muscle and bone loss after 60 wasn't inevitable, it was manageable. The body, even in its later years, had an extraordinary ability to respond when given the right care. Yvonne began to see her meals not as something routine, but as an opportunity to heal. When she stirred chia seeds into her morning oatmeal for the first time, she watched them swell and turn into tiny pearls, as if each one carried a hidden strength waiting to be released. The texture was unusual, but she smiled as she ate, thinking about how even something so small could carry such power. Days passed, and Yvonne's confidence grew alongside her new habits. She began taking slow walks in the garden again, running her fingers across the lavender bushes and listening to the soft crunch of gravel beneath her shoes. Her joints still complained some days, but there was less fear in her movements. She no longer walked with the constant thought of falling. Instead, she walked with curiosity, wondering how far she could go today or how long she could stand before her knees grew tired. These little victories, invisible to most, felt monumental to her. It wasn't just her body that was healing, but her relationship with aging itself. At Sunday dinner, when her grandson spilled a glass of milk and everyone jumped up to clean, Yvonne bent down and picked up the cloth first. She felt her daughter's surprised gaze but chose not to explain. For the first time in months, she didn't hesitate to move quickly. Later that night, Anna said softly, "I think you're getting stronger, Mom." Yvonne laughed gently and replied, "Or maybe I just stopped believing I was weak." That evening, as she sat by the window sipping her tea, Yvonne reflected on the quiet shift taking place within her. Seeds weren't magic, she knew that, but they were teaching her something deeper. That strength wasn't only measured by how far she could walk or how much she could lift. Strength also lived in her willingness to try, to adapt, and to believe in small beginnings. Each seed reminded her that healing doesn't always come in grand gestures. Sometimes it comes in spoonfuls. Her story was no longer about pain and loss. It was becoming a story about discovery, about realizing that the body still listens even after 60, if only you give it what it needs. And for Yvonne, this realization was more than nutrition. It was hope reborn, quiet and steady, like the rhythm of her own heartbeat. The first real test came on a chilly morning in late autumn. Yvonne woke with a stiffness in her lower back, the kind that once would have convinced her to stay seated most of the day. But instead of surrendering, she walked slowly into the kitchen, her robe tied tightly, and set a pot of water to boil. She remembered the little bag of flax seeds her doctor had once mentioned, still sitting unopened in her pantry. She pulled it down, running her fingers across the rough paper package, and thought, why not today? Grinding the seeds was new to her. She borrowed Anna's small coffee grinder and laughed when the machine whirred loudly, turning the glossy brown seeds into a fine powder. It looks like nothing special, she murmured to herself, spooning it into her oatmeal, but maybe this is where strength begins. The nutty taste was subtle, almost invisible, but as she sat at the table with her steaming bowl, she felt a quiet pride. Not because the flax seeds worked instantly, but because she had chosen again, with intention, to keep moving forward. That afternoon, while folding laundry, she realized something. The ache in her back had eased, not vanished, but softened into something manageable. It was a small difference, but she could feel it. Later that week, when she visited her doctor, she mentioned the seeds casually, as if not wanting to seem too hopeful. The doctor smiled and said, "Flax is one of nature's healers. It calms the body's fire. That stiffness you've been feeling, it's often inflammation. And when you calm that, everything begins to move more freely." The word fire stayed in Yvonne's mind. She thought about how her joints sometimes burned after a long day, how her shoulders stiffened like cold wood. For the first time, she imagined her body not as failing, but as quietly asking for help, asking to be soothed. And she realized that with every spoonful of flax, she was gently cooling that fire. As days turned into weeks, Yvonne began to notice more than just the easing of stiffness. Her digestion felt calmer, her sleep deeper. She could sit longer in her favorite chair without shifting uncomfortably, and when she stood, her steps carried more confidence. Anna noticed too. One evening she said, "Mom, you look rested. Even your face seems more at peace." Yvonne touched her cheek and smiled, realizing that the relief wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. For the first time in years, she wasn't bracing herself for pain with every movement. Her grandson noticed in his own way. During their walks in the park, he no longer had to slow his pace for her as much. One afternoon, as the leaves crunched beneath their feet, he looked up at her and said, "Grandma, you're faster than last time." Yvonne laughed, her heart swelling with joy. To him, it was a small comment. But to her, it was proof that her body was responding, that she wasn't just imagining the change. At night, as she prepared for bed, Yvonne often reflected on the simplicity of it all. Seeds, things she had overlooked her entire life, were quietly giving her back parts of herself she thought were gone. There were still hard days, of course. Some mornings, her knees ached, and some nights, her back complained. But the difference was clear. She no longer felt powerless. She was learning that healing didn't mean perfection. It meant progress. One spoonful, one step, one choice at a time. As she lay in bed, she whispered a small prayer of gratitude, not just for the seeds, but for the strength to keep believing in them. Her story was unfolding gently, not with grand transformations, but with steady, quiet victories. And with each one, she found herself asking, what else might my body be waiting for me to discover? One Saturday morning, Yvonne joined her daughter at the farmer's market, a place buzzing with chatter and bright colors. She had always loved markets, the smells of fresh bread, herbs bundled in twine, baskets of fruit stacked high. As they wandered past a stall filled with glass jars, Yvonne noticed one labeled sesame seeds. The sight of them pulled her back to childhood, to the smell of toasted sesame oil in her mother's kitchen. For a moment, she stood still, remembering the warmth of those meals, the strength of her mother's hands as she worked the dough sprinkled with tiny white seeds. Anna noticed her expression and asked gently, "Do you want to try them, Mom?" Yvonne nodded, almost shyly. She bought a small bag and tucked it into her basket, but as they walked away, she whispered, "I'd forgotten how powerful these little things were. My mother used them for everything." That evening, she toasted the seeds lightly in a pan, their nutty aroma filling the kitchen just as it had when she was a girl. When she stirred them into her vegetables, she felt as though she was feeding not only her body, but her memories too. The next morning, Yvonne woke with an unusual sense of energy. It wasn't dramatic, but she noticed she could bend more easily, her knees less resistant when she reached for a pot in the lower cupboard. She laughed softly, thinking of her mother who used to say, "Nature always gives us what we need if we pay attention." For the first time in years, those words made sense. The sesame seeds, rich with calcium and minerals, seemed to slip quietly into her body, reinforcing the places that felt fragile, stitching together what time had slowly worn thin. Later that week, Yvonne invited Anna and her grandson over for lunch. She prepared a simple meal of soup, salad, and a small jar of tahini, creamy sesame paste she had discovered at the market. She drizzled it onto roasted vegetables, watching her grandson wrinkle his nose at the new flavor. "Try it," she encouraged with a smile. To her delight, he did, and soon asked for more bread to dip into the nutty spread. Anna looked at her mother with surprise. "You've never used tahini before." Yvonne smiled and said, "I'm learning that the things we overlook often hold the most strength." That evening, as she cleaned the dishes, Yvonne thought about the way food had connected her across generations. Her mother's kitchen, her daughter's concern, her grandson's curiosity. She realized that healing wasn't just about her bones or muscles. It was about carrying forward wisdom, about honoring what had always been there. The sesame seeds weren't just nutrients, they were a bridge to her past and a gift to her future. Over the next few days, she noticed something else. The stiffness in her hips, which often made sitting uncomfortable, began to ease. She no longer shifted endlessly in her chair during Sunday service or gripped the pew for balance as she stood. The change was subtle, but it gave her freedom. She could listen, sing, and stand without thinking about pain. It was a kind of independence she hadn't realized she'd lost until it returned. One evening, Anna found her mother grinding sesame seeds in a small mortar and pestle. "Mom, you're really committed to this, aren't you?" she asked. Yvonne looked up with a soft smile. "It's not just about commitment, Anna. It's about trust. For years, I thought aging meant surrender. Now I'm learning it means listening." She paused, pressing her hand over her chest. "And I think my body is grateful I finally listened." The sesame seeds became more than food. They became a daily prayer, a reminder that strength could be rebuilt with patience and care. Yvonne no longer measured her progress by what she couldn't do. Instead, she celebrated what she could, standing taller in her kitchen, walking with less hesitation, lifting her grandson without fear. These weren't miracles. They were the quiet victories of someone who refused to give up. That night, as she sat in her favorite chair, Yvonne reflected on how far she had come since that first spoonful of pumpkin seeds. She felt stronger, steadier, and most importantly, hopeful. She whispered to herself, "Maybe aging isn't about losing, it's about discovering the hidden gifts waiting to be found." And with that thought, she looked toward the next day with anticipation, wondering what other small treasures nature had in store for her. The first frost of winter arrived quietly, coating Yvonne's garden with a silver shimmer. She stood by the window, watching her breath fog against the glass, and thought about how different she felt compared to just a few months ago. Her movements were steadier, her mornings less burdened by pain. Still, the cold seemed to awaken an ache in her shoulders and knees, as if her body was reminding her it was still fragile. She pulled her sweater tighter and whispered, "I'm not done yet. I can do more." Later that week, while visiting a neighborhood shop, she spotted a row of small bags filled with sunflower seeds. They looked so simple, so ordinary, yet something about them caught her attention. She remembered the doctor mentioning vitamin E and how it acted like a shield for the body, protecting muscles from the slow wear of time. She bought a bag, slipped it into her basket, and told herself she would give these little kernels a chance. That evening, she scattered a spoonful of the seeds onto her oatmeal. Their crunch surprised her, but she found the flavor comforting, almost cheerful. Over the next few days, she began adding them to salads, soups, even snacking on them raw. She didn't expect much at first, but then she noticed something subtle. Her recovery felt faster. When she spent time sweeping the floors or walking in the park, she no longer paid the price of aching muscles for days afterward. Instead, the soreness lifted quickly, almost as though her body had begun repairing itself with new determination. Anna noticed the difference before Yvonne did. One evening after dinner, she said, "Mom, you seem stronger these days." Even your face looks brighter." Yvonne smiled, pressing her hand against her daughter's. "It's these little seeds, Anna. They may look plain, but they make me feel as though my body is learning to heal again." Anna squeezed her hand and whispered, "I'm proud of you." Those words carried Yvonne through the rest of the evening like a quiet melody. Her grandson, too, began to notice. One cold morning, when he challenged her to a race from the front door to the end of the driveway, she laughed and agreed. She didn't run, her legs weren't ready for that, but she walked briskly, keeping pace with his little steps. By the time they reached the mailbox, she was out of breath, but not defeated. He clapped his hands and shouted, "Grandma, you're fast!" She laughed, bending to hug him, her heart swelling with pride. It wasn't about speed, it was about the fact that she had joined him, without fear, without hesitation. The sunflower seeds became her quiet companions in this new chapter. She learned that their strength wasn't just in vitamins and minerals, but in what they symbolized, resilience. Each tiny seed seemed to remind her that she too could be small yet strong, soft yet enduring. On nights when the cold made her joints ache, she thought of the seeds shielding her body from the inside, helping her muscles recover, protecting her bones from breaking down too quickly. It was a comforting thought, one that gave her courage to keep going. One afternoon, as she and Anna prepared lunch together, Yvonne shared a reflection. "You know, I used to think healing had to come from something complicated. Pills, treatments, things that felt out of reach. But the truth is, it's the simple things, the things we overlook, that often hold the most power." Anna nodded, watching her mother sprinkle sunflower seeds over a bowl of greens. "Maybe that's the lesson, Mom. That strength comes from the smallest choices, repeated every day." That night, as Yvonne settled into bed, she thought about how far she had come since those first uncertain steps in the kitchen months ago. From pumpkin seeds to flax, sesame to sunflower, each had added something new, not just to her body, but to her spirit. She felt layers of herself returning, as though age was no longer only about loss, but also about discovery. Her joints were still tender, yes, but she carried herself with a confidence she hadn't felt in years. For Yvonne, the sunflower seeds weren't just food, they were a symbol of protection, a reminder that her body still had the power to recover, to rebuild, and to carry her into tomorrow with quiet strength. And as she drifted to sleep, she whispered a prayer of gratitude for the small things that were helping her feel whole again. The first signs came in the late afternoons. Yvonne noticed she no longer felt as drained as before. There had always been a slump, a heaviness that settled into her shoulders around 3 o'clock, when even the simplest tasks felt like climbing a hill. But now, as she moved about her home, folding laundry or writing letters at her desk, she felt steadier, her energy lasting longer into the day. She paused one afternoon, teacup in hand, and wondered quietly, what's changed? The answer, she realized, had slipped almost unnoticed into her routine. Almonds. It started with just a few, soaked overnight in a small bowl of water. In the mornings, she peeled off their soft skins and ate them slowly, savoring the mild sweetness. At first, it felt like just another small habit, but as the days passed, the difference grew clearer. Her movement seemed smoother, her hands more certain when buttoning her blouse, her steps more coordinated when walking across the garden path. One evening, Anna came by after work and found her mother bustling in the kitchen. "You're moving like you used to," Anna said with surprise. Yvonne laughed softly. "Maybe these almonds have something to do with it. They seem to carry a strength I didn't expect." She handed Anna one of the soaked almonds and said, "Taste it. It's like energy in its simplest form." Anna smiled and ate it, nodding in agreement. The truth was, Yvonne could feel the change not only in her body, but in her confidence. She no longer feared the little lapses that once embarrassed her, dropping a spoon, losing her balance while bending down, forgetting where she'd placed her reading glasses. Her doctor had once explained that almonds supported both muscles and the nervous system, protecting the tiny signals that connected brain to body. Yvonne hadn't fully understood then, but now, living it, she realized what it meant. Her reflexes felt sharper, her steps more secure. She wasn't just stronger, she was steadier. Her grandson noticed too. One afternoon, while playing a game of catch in the yard, he threw the ball a little too quickly. Months ago, Yvonne might have fumbled or missed, but this time, her hand rose almost instinctively, catching the ball with a proud laugh. "Grandma," he shouted, eyes wide with delight, "you're fast." She smiled, her heart swelling with joy. For her, it wasn't just about catching the ball, it was about catching a glimpse of herself again, the woman she thought she had left behind. The almonds became part of her rhythm, a quiet reminder that even at her age, her body still responded to care. They weren't glamorous, not wrapped in shiny packaging or sold as miracle cures, but they gave her something far greater: consistency. Each day they whispered to her body, "You are still capable, you are still whole." At dinner one evening, Yvonne shared her reflection with Anna. "I used to think aging was a slow unraveling, like a thread pulled loose until nothing remained. But now I see it differently. It's not unraveling, it's weaving. Every choice, every seed, every almond, it's adding something back, strengthening what time tries to take away." Anna listened, her eyes glistening. "Mom, you're teaching me more about aging than I could ever read in a book." That night, as she prepared for bed, Yvonne looked at her hands, the same hands that had cooked countless meals, held babies, folded clothes, and built a life. They were still steady, still strong, still hers. She realized then that strength was never about defying age. It was about embracing it with grace, finding ways to nourish what remained and cherishing every bit of progress. As she drifted into sleep, Yvonne felt something she hadn't felt in years: trust in her body. The almonds had given her more than energy. They had restored her faith that she could rely on herself, that she could move through her days with steadiness and dignity. And with that trust, she knew she was ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. Looking back, Yvonne's story reminds us how strength doesn't always return in loud or dramatic ways. It often arrives quietly through small, consistent choices. What began with one spoonful of pumpkin seeds in her soup slowly grew into a series of daily habits that changed the course of her life. The woman who once gripped the edge of a table to rise from her chair now walks with confidence beside her grandson, bending, moving, even catching a ball without fear. Her transformation was not just physical, but deeply emotional. Seeds and nuts gave her more than minerals and nutrients. They restored her faith in her own body. Where once she saw aging as inevitable decline, she now sees it as a season of discovery, where every meal can be an act of healing, every small step a proof of resilience. Through patience and care, Yvonne learned that independence is not lost at 60 or 70. It can be nurtured, protected, and renewed. As you reflect on her journey, consider what small choices you can make today. A handful of seeds, a moment of care for your body, a promise whispered to yourself. It may not seem like much now, but over time, it can bring back strength you thought was gone. Yvonne's story is not just hers. It belongs to anyone willing to believe that the body, even in its later years, still listens when we treat it with kindness. And so let her journey be a reminder. It is never too late to begin again. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and trust that every small choice you make today can carry you toward a brighter, steadier tomorrow.